Hello all out there in YouTube, and welcome to another episode of Horror Talk. Insert clever opening here. For anybody who's new on my channel, this is the series I like to do that is a little more relaxed. It's less formal than my other stuff. There's no real research involved in this. There's no scripting. There's no notes taken. It's all just kind of done on the fly. I just talk about a specific topic of horror off the top of my head. And I hope you like rambling, because these videos can get a tad rambly. So, I have gotten a few requests to talk about slasher movies for a horror talk. So, as you can see by the title of this video, today we're going to talk about slasher movies. I aim to please. So, let's just jump right into the topic at hand. When it comes to the horror genre, slasher films are probably the most notorious subgenre in horror films. I know it hasn't always been that way. I mean, 1930s, 40s, and 50s, we didn't really have slasher movies back then, but as soon as the slasher genre started gaining traction in 60s, really beginning in the 70s, and then exploding in the 80s, horror has become so... slasher movies have become so synonymous with the horror genre. Zombie movies nowadays might be a little more notorious than slasher movies, but not by much. I mean, slasher movies have just become so ingrained in the horror genre that whenever you think about the horror genre, slasher movies instantly come to mind. If you were to talk to somebody who isn't really big into the horror genre, they're going to, and you ask them to talk about horror movies, or ask them what they know about horror movies, most of what they talk about is going to probably involve the slasher genre. Whenever you hear people talk about cliches in horror movies, like somebody running upstairs instead of going out the front door, splitting up when there's obvious danger, don't have sex or you're going to get murdered, the concept of the final girl, these cliches are all part of the slasher genre. Not necessarily horror as a whole. I mean, other genres in horror, other subgenres in horror, do have some of those cliches, but the majority of the time when people think of horror movie cliches, they're found in the slasher genre. So it, in a way, becomes only natural for the slasher genre to be the first thing that pops into people's heads when they think of horror movies. And whenever you ask somebody to name some horror movie villains, the first three that always come to mind are Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees. The three big slasher villains. I mean, they have pretty much become the faces of horror. You had the classic Universal monsters like Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman, who deserve to be up there with Freddy, Jason, and Michael. I think they deserve to be seen as horror movie icons together, but they get overshadowed by Freddy, Jason, and Michael. Even newer horror villains that come out now, they aren't the first thing that pops into your head when you think of horror. Like Jigsaw, and Pennywise has gained some traction, but he's still not the first one that comes to mind. It's always Freddy, Michael, and Jason that first pop into your head when someone says, hey, give me some slasher villains. I'm sorry, I mean, give me some horror villains. But yeah, okay, when you ask people, give me some horror villains, Michael, Jason, and Freddy are usually the first ones that pop into their heads. And the main reason why I think slasher movies have become such a huge part of the horror genre, and why it always seems to come up when talking about horror, is because when slasher films first started coming onto the scene, and it was around the same time when horror started getting a little more of an edge to it. You can't talk about slasher movies without talking about the proto-slasher movies, the slasher movies that became what set the stage for slasher movies to come. Psycho, of course, is the obvious choice, as well as Peeping Tom. They came out around the same time. But focusing mostly on Psycho, Peeping Tom deserves credit for being a stepping stone for the slasher genre, but let's focus on Psycho because that is the big one. It started showing a little more violence in the horror genre, and it was when the Hays Code was still out there, so there were still restrictions of what you could put in movies, but Psycho started pushing the envelope a little more as to what you could do in horror, or movies in general. Peeping Tom focused on that as well. It was a horror movie about voyeurism, and the slasher genre, it involves a lot of voyeurism. You see a lot of point-of-view shots. You see a lot of moments when the killer is watching their victims. Voyeurism has a huge part in the slasher genre, and Peeping Tom is really when voyeurism started getting explored in the horror genre. And then, of course, you had the Herschel Gordon Lewis movies. Blood Feast, a very important horror movie. Yeah, it's hard to think, oh wait, Blood Feast, that silly little low-budget movie with bad acting and cheesy gore effects, that's an important movie? It is. It was the horror movie that really... It was the movie that really introduced gore into cinema. And yes, the effects are cheap in that, but that's because Herschel Gordon Lewis, when making Blood Feast, invented gore effects in that film. So you had another stepping stone to the slasher genre. Then, of course, the Giallo movies. God, I could go on forever about Giallo movies, but if you watch Giallo cinema, again, all these different movies you see as a building block for, or different building blocks for the slasher genre. Especially, a lot of people say Bay of Blood, which the Friday the 13th series owes a lot to, and it's true, and that's by Mario Bava. Mario Bava's Bay of Blood was a major stepping stone for slasher movies, so much to the point that people consider that the first official slasher movie. And I say it almost is, but it has too many giallo elements to really be a full-blown slasher movie. If you say that Bay of Blood is a slasher film, I say, you know what? You're probably right. If you, it's like, if it's a slasher movie to you, you're right. If it's not a slasher movie to you, you're also right. It walks such a fine line between slasher and non-slasher, that, or slasher and giallo movie, that either side can kind of be right in this case. It's the same thing with a movie like Seven. Seven walks such a fine line between psychological thriller and horror movie that either side has a valid argument in that point. But I do think Seven is a horror movie, so take that. But anyway, a lot of people say that Bay of Blood is the first official slasher movie, or the biggest stepping stone in the slasher genre, but I think it's Blood and Black Lace from 1964, which is another Mario Bava movie, because it captures exactly what a slasher movie is. You have a guy in a mask going around killing a bunch of models in different ways. What are slasher movies about? You have a group of people in a location being stalked by an unknown killer, being killed in different ways. You have that in Blood and Black Lace. A guy in a mask, in this location, in this case a house of high fashion, killing a bunch of models in different ways. Admittedly, they're not as bloody as movies that will come in this genre, or even giallo movies. It's not as bloody as other giallo movies. It's certainly not as bloody as Bay of Blood. Yeah. Do a counter here. Take a shot whenever I say blood. Don't do that. You'll probably die of alcohol poisoning. But anyway. So yeah, the kills in Blood and Black Lace aren't as violent as, or aren't as bloody as kills that would come later in these different genres, but they're still violent and they're still unique. Each one is different. And again, looking back at Herschel Gordon Lewis with Blood Feast, killing various people in different ways and finding different unique ways to kill people. And you saw that also in 2000 Maniacs after Blood Feast, and the kills got more unique and more different. So I think that Blood Feast and Blood and Black Lace are just as important to the horror genre as Psycho and Peeping Tom. I think all four of those movies need to be grouped together. And then as we go later on in the genre, going into the 70s, when the slasher genre truly began, with Bay of Blood being that transition movie from giallo cinema to slasher movies, that's when the slasher genre began. And that's in the 70s when movies started becoming more violent and you had more blood in them. And then we got to the 80s. The slasher genre exploded in the 80s, and they were very bloody movies, and they were, not the high-class art that a lot of movie fans and film critics, usually liked to talk about. And that, I think, is why slasher movies became so popular. Because slasher movies were the forbidden fruit. Movies were pretty classy up until the 70s, and they were still classy in the 70s, but they just started, there started to be more freedom in what movies could do, so you could have more nudity, you could have more violence. The rating system began in 1968 with Night of the Living Dead, and then after that happened, boom, people could start putting nudity in movies, they could start putting blood in movies, and that is where the slasher movie really began. Because it's like, okay, now we can kill people in different ways, now we can show some nudity, and it was really shown in these movies. But there were plenty of other movies from the 70s and the 80s later to come that had nudity and blood in them anyway. But the reason the slasher genre got signaled out for that is because that's what they were about. They were about finding unique ways to kill people. They were about, showing nudity. They were about excess. Something that audiences really wanted. Okay, we finally have the freedom to be able to see this stuff on film, so let's go for it. Let's see the blood, let's see the tits, and let's enjoy it. So the slasher genre became the black sheep of the horror genre to critics and people who didn't really approve of movies becoming more violent and movies becoming a little more sleazy. And that's why I think the slasher genre became so popular, because so many people were told not to watch it that people wanted to watch it. I've watched videos from different YouTubers, and I've spoken to many horror fans that have said they got into the genre at a young age, and their parents allowed them to watch horror movies. But that wasn't the case with everybody. Me, for example. My mom did not approve of me watching horror movies, and she did not want me to watch horror movies. So she didn't really approve of my brother or me watching rated R movies. However, luckily for my brother and myself, our dad let us watch rated R movies. My parents were separated, so we'd be at my mom's house for the week, and during the weekend we'd stay at my dad's house, and we would go to the video store and rent some movies that we could watch at nights at my dad's house. And he'd let us rent what we wanted, because, he was awesome. I'm sorry. He trusted us as kids to be able to handle what we could watch. Because I've said this before, I am perfectly fine with kids seeing rated R movies as long as the parents know they can handle it. If your kid can handle it, they should be allowed to watch it. That's what I say. If your kid has heard of a movie, then, in my mind, they're old enough to watch it. So my dad would let my brother and I watch rated R movies, and that's where I finally was able to see the horror genre. I had always been interested in horror and scary things, but while at my mom's house I wasn't allowed to watch it, at my dad's house I was. And the slasher genre was like the big no-no, because the slasher genre was trash, according to certain people. I know I wasn't the only child who had to deal with that. A lot of us horror fans started when we were young, and some of us, our parents allowed us to watch horror movies. Others, our parents wouldn't let us watch horror movies. Or they would let us watch certain horror movies, but certain horror movies we were not allowed to see, like the slasher genre. In many ways, for a lot of us horror fans, the slasher genre was the first form of rebellion. Horror movies, I think, are a healthy way of rebelling against your parents. If your parents don't want you to watch something, you watch it. That's a harmless form of rebellion, and so that's why I'm all for letting kids watch horror movies. Because if you don't allow your kid to watch rated R movies, if you say they're not allowed to watch rated R movies, they're going to want to watch rated R movies more. And they're going to find a way to watch them, especially with the internet out there. It doesn't matter if you block their phone or whatever. They have friends whose phones are not blocked. They're going to find a way to watch these movies. No matter what you do, they're going to be able to find a way to watch rated R movies. So yeah, so for many of us slasher fans, for many of us horror movie fans, the slasher genre was the first rebellion for us. It was our first rebellious act, watching these movies that we weren't allowed to watch. And I think that's why the slasher genre is so popular with many horror fans. Because I've noticed, when you're younger, a lot of us horror fans, when we were younger, the slasher genre was our favorite genre. Because, again, that was the forbidden fruit. And I think that's why it was our favorite genre, because it was forbidden. So we watched this stuff, and it gave us that rebellious feelings, like, yeah, we're watching something we shouldn't watch. And it was like, okay, we're kids watching these violent movies, made you feel a little more adult, made you feel a little more hardcore. Forgive all the quotations. I don't know why I'm doing them. But anyway. So yeah, so I noticed a lot of horror fans when they're younger, the slasher genre is their favorite genre. But I've also noticed, as we get older and we're allowed to watch more horror movies, and we're allowed to watch more stuff, some horror fans, the slasher genre is still their favorite genre. But there's also a lot of horror fans who the slasher genre kind of drops down a little for them. I've noticed some horror fans, the slasher genre becomes their least favorite genre. And there are others who still love the slasher genre, but it's not quite their favorite genre anymore. And that's where I am. When I was younger, the slasher genre was my favorite subgenre in horror. As I've gotten older, I still love the slasher genre. I just don't love it as much as I used to. I've become more fond of Italian horror movies. I've become more fond of body horror and cosmic horror. Those genres have overtaken the slasher genre as my favorite subgenre. Still love the slasher genre, and I still love a good slasher movie. But a lot of horror fans, as they grow older, their tastes change. That happens to everybody, and I think that would be an interesting video for a horror talk sometime, talking about how tastes change as you get older, and as you see more stuff. Because I've also noticed, and forgive me for this little tangent, when I was younger, I didn't like black and white horror movies, but as I got older and started watching more black and white horror movies, I developed a bigger appreciation for them. So let me know if you want me to talk about that topic sometime, how tastes change as you get older. And I'm going to get into that a little later in this video with a specific movie. You'll probably know what it is. You probably know what's coming. But anyway, so yes, so when we're a kid, the slasher genre is our favorite genre, because it was the forbidden fruit that we were able to see and we were able to find. As some of us get older, even though some of us still love the slasher genre, others don't really see the slasher genre as their favorite genre anymore. And I think that's because why people both love and complain about the slasher genre, and I think every slasher fan can admit this. I am a slasher fan, even though it's not my favorite genre anymore. I still love the genre. Every slasher fan can admit there's not much variety in the slasher genre. I mean, come on. And that's become a big thing with me. As much as I still love the slasher genre, I've noticed that I don't quite prefer the typical slasher movies as much as I prefer the slasher movies that are different from other movies in the genre. So, like, when I was a kid, I'd say, like, you know, Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, and Friday the 13th are some of my favorite slasher movies. As I've gotten older, I've become more fond of movies like Maniac, like Alice Sweet Alice, stuff like that, where it is a slasher movie, but it's different. It doesn't feel like other slasher movies. The slasher genre is a movie that is rife with cliches. I mean, like I said, there isn't a lot of variety in the slasher genre, and every slasher fan can admit that. And I understand that's a weird thing coming from me, because if you've watched my videos, you've heard me say that I've grown tired of the vampire genre and the zombie genre because of the lack of variety in them. Because we've gotten a bombardment of so many of these movies, I've grown tired of them. Well, why haven't I grown tired of slasher movies? I do think people did get tired of the slasher genre. When we had the slasher boom in the 80s, you know, we got such a bombardment of slasher movies, people did eventually become tired of them. That's why the slasher era kind of ended. And we still get slasher movies now, but not as much as we used to. Because we had so much thrown at us, or audiences had so much slasher movies thrown at them, and there was not much variety between them, they got tired of the genre after a while, and they moved on. And we've seen that today. You saw that with the found footage genre. The found footage genre exploded. People milked that genre for all it was, and people eventually got tired of it. You see that now with zombie movies. There's so much zombie-related material out there that people have gotten sick of it. It's just like, okay, we want some variety in our zombie movies. I've heard people say that they're craving a slasher boom. It's like, okay, we've had the found footage boom, we had the vampire boom, we had the zombie boom, we had this haunted house possession boom. I hope we get another slasher boom. I'm a slasher fan who's actually hoping we don't get another slasher boom, because the same thing's going to happen. It's going to get stale. It got stale once before. And if we have another slasher boom, it's going to get stale again, just like found footage movies got stale, just like vampire movies got stale, just like zombie movies got stale. And that's not to say we still don't get good movies in those genres. We do. It's just that there's so much to choose from, you do get tired of it pretty quickly. Especially when you watch as many movies as I do, or many of us people on YouTube who talk about movies. We see a lot of movies, so stuff can get stale for us really quickly. But anyway, so I'm hoping we don't get a slasher boom, because I don't want the genre to become stale. It has become a little stale for me, but not so much to the point where I don't like it. But why am I okay with still being a slasher fan and not as big a fan as I used to be of zombie movies and vampire movies, when slasher movies have the same problem as those movies, the lack of variety? One of the reasons I think this is, and again, one of the reasons why I think people love the slasher genre so much, it's comfort food. I mean, zombie movies, with so many zombie movies, it's never really about the zombies. It's about what you can say with zombies. That's how it was ever since Night of the Living Dead came out. Ever since George Romero made Night of the Living Dead, zombie movies have become a way of commenting on society, commenting on something. Every time you see a zombie movie, with most zombie movies, there are exceptions of course, but with most zombie movies, the zombies are the threat, but they're not the enemy. It's always people who are the enemy, people who are not zombies who are the enemy. There's, you know, it's always commenting how when shit goes down, society turns against itself, which is a very true statement. But you see that in every zombie movie. And with vampire movies, they're more seen as highbrow horror. So many vampire movies are seen as highbrow horror, whereas slasher movies are seen as lowbrow horror. But slasher movies are comfort food. You go into a slasher movie, you know what you're going to get. You're going to get a killer stalking people. You're going to get a variety of different kills. You're going to get some nudity. Some slasher movies have nudity, some don't. But if you're watching a slasher film, there's a good chance there's going to be nudity. But you're guaranteed a variety of kills. You know what you're getting into. And again, that's comfort food. Like when you go to a fancy restaurant, you're there for a good meal. You know that you're gonna have some decent experience. But when you go to a dive bar, okay, it's nothing fancy, but you know you're gonna have some damn good burgers, some damn good fried chicken, and you know you're gonna like it. That's the slasher genre. You go into a slasher genre, you know what you're gonna get. And that's very appealing. People like comfort food. Not to say that there isn't any highbrow slasher movies, because there are such thing as gourmet burgers, and you do get gourmet slasher movies, like Alice, Sweet Alice. That's not lowbrow horror at all. It's violent and creepy, and it has that slasher vibe, but it does have a bit of a classiness to it. So yeah, like, you can get high-class slasher movies. Nightmare on Elm Street is a perfect example of that. It's a slasher movie that doesn't follow the typical slasher formula. So, that's like gourmet burger. There. Oh, the food analogies. But anyway, yeah, I think that's the main reason why so many people love the slasher genre and are okay with the slasher movie cliches, unlike, you know, getting tired of found footage movies and zombie movies and vampire movies and stuff like that, because slasher movies are comfort food. They revel in these cliches. They know that these cliches are involved, and that's kind of why people go to them. Is like, when you have a long, hard day at work, and you just want to sit down, unwind, and watch a movie, you kind of want to turn your brain off a little bit, or even leave your brain on so you can make fun of stuff, but you don't want, when you come home from a hard day at work, you don't want something that's a little too flashy. You want something simple that you can unwind and watch. And slasher movies are a perfect example of that. Yeah, so that's why I think so many people still love the slasher genre, even though it has all these cliches and there's a severe lack of variety. And, you know, because a lot of times you watch a slasher movie for the kills. You want to see how's the next person going to get it, especially when it's done with practical effects, because that part in your mind makes you think, how did they do this? Why is it so appealing to watch kills? Because it's fun. Controlled violence is fun. When you have so much bullshit going on in the world, sometimes watching simulated violence can be a comfort. And I know that sounds weird, but watching it on a screen and knowing that it's not really happening in there, it's not really happening within the confines of the movie, that can be a bit of a comfort, and knowing that you can have fun with it instead of having to be afraid of it, or being afraid of it, but having fun with the fact that you are afraid of it, that can be a good escape. I know it sounds weird, but sometimes violence in a movie can be a good escape from violence in real life. Which is very strange to say, I know. But at the same time, that also explains why some people can get tired of the slasher genre after a while. Because again, there's a lack of variety. But you do have those standout slasher movies that are different from every other slasher movie out there. Alone in the Dark, back there, is a very different slasher movie. It came out in 1982, and you have multiple killers in that. When it comes to slasher movies, I've said this before in my videos, there are 3 different types of slashers. You have the ones that focus more on the kills than story, suspense, and atmosphere. These are movies like Friday the 13th, or The Mangler, or The Prowler. Then you have the slasher movies that focus more on story than the actual kills. They focus more on the story, they focus more on the atmosphere, they focus more on suspense. These are movies like Halloween, and like I said, Alone in the Dark. Alice, Sweet Alice is a perfect example of that. The original Black Christmas. It has some great kills in there, but the main focus of that movie is the atmosphere and the tension and the story going on with the slasher genre, or with the kills. And then you have the movies that focus both on story, atmosphere, and kills. Nightmare on Elm Street is a perfect example of this. Maniac is a great example of this. Maniac is one of those interesting slasher movies where it walks a fine line between slasher and serial killer movie. There are definitely serial killer movies that can be considered slasher movies, and then there can be serial killer movies that are just considered serial killer movies. I'll talk about that at another time, but Maniac is definitely is a serial killer movie and a slasher movie at the same time. One of the reasons I love it so much is because of that mix. There are a lot of people who don't like Maniac, and I understand why. A lot of people don't like... It makes them uncomfortable. It makes them uncomfortable to be with Frank Zito, because he's just such a dirty man. I've seen a lot of people, and I've talked to quite a few people who have never seen the original Maniac, but they saw the Maniac remake. I'm the reverse. I have not seen the Maniac remake yet. I'm curious, though, and I will check it out eventually. But what bugs me is you have a lot of people that say Maniac doesn't get into the killer's head. Maniac does get into the killer's head. It just doesn't spoon-feed it to you. It treats the audience like they're smart enough to figure things out for themselves. It doesn't just straight up tell you, oh, this is what's going on in the killer's mind, or doing like a thing where we see some weird thing in the killer's mind and we see something from his perspective or whatever. No. It gives you the story, and it gives you all these little hints of what's going on inside his head. Hell, there's even times when we hear conversations with himself inside his head. So yeah, Maniac definitely does get into people's heads. And again, the reason a lot of people don't like Maniac is because they feel really uncomfortable hanging out with this scary man. That's actually one of the reasons why I love Maniac so much. It forces you to hang out with the slasher, and that's very unsettling to people. But I like to ask people, because so many people love Freddy Krueger, so many people love Jason Voorhees, so many people love Michael Myers. Would you like them as much if you had to hang out with them? I know a lot of people say, oh yeah, Freddy Krueger, he's awesome, I'd love to hang out with him sometime. Would you really? Because Maniac is a movie that's all about the killer and what goes on in the killer's world. If you had to hang out with Freddy and see his demented fantasies and see his demented way of doing things, would you really want to hang out with him? I mean, I don't know. The reason most people love these killers so much is we just get to see them do the killing. We get to see them being fun. We don't really have to see their psychosis. In Maniac, we're forced to see the psychosis. We're forced to be with the slasher. And I think that makes for a much more terrifying movie. And I think, this shows that, hey, if we had to hang out with Freddy Krueger or Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers and actually see what goes on in their world, we wouldn't like them as much. I really don't think we would. But anyway, yeah, so a little tangent about Maniac, because that is a slasher movie that I absolutely love. And you see Texas Chainsaw Massacre back here, which some people say isn't really a slasher movie. They say it's more of a proto-slasher movie. I think you can put it in the genre, and I understand if people don't put it in the genre. But for me it's a slasher movie, and I'm going to say this, there's no point in arguing with me, because I'm very stubborn. If you don't think it's a slasher movie, that's fine. I think it's a slasher movie. And looking at Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Black Christmas, 1974 might have been one of the most important years for the slasher genre, because that's when you had Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Black Christmas, and, I did a review of this a while back, Madhouse, starring Vincent Price and Peter Cushing. That is another slasher movie to come out in 1974 that deserves a lot more credit. A lot of people say Black Christmas deserves so much credit for being the main official slasher movie before Halloween, but Madhouse also has all these elements we see in slasher movies, the same elements that we see in Black Christmas. It came out the same year, 1974, but it came out months before Black Christmas and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So when you look at Madhouse, again, you have a guy in a mask going around killing people in different ways, and it's a PG horror movie. But again, you've heard me say this before, 1970s PG, which is very different from PG nowadays. There was no PG-13 rating until 1984, so rated PG was essentially PG-13. And it still manages to have some damn good kills. But again, you have this masked figure going around killing people in these different ways. So you see this really important movie, Madhouse, which is a slasher movie before Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Black Christmas. Just by a few months, but still, I think that movie deserves credit. But anyway, looking at 1974, you had these three movies, Madhouse, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Black Christmas. That's the order they came out in. And they have all these elements of the slasher genre. And then after that, we got Alice, Sweet Alice. We got The Town That Dreaded Sundown. And then we got Halloween from 1978, which a lot of times gets credit for being the first official slasher movie. You had Friday the 13th after that, and Halloween and Friday the 13th were very important to the slasher genre. I mean, they started the slasher boom. A lot of people say it was just Halloween. A lot of people say it was more Friday the 13th. But no, it was these movies together. 1978, 1980, these movies caused the slasher boom in the 80s. Again, but they get a lot of credit for starting the slasher genre. But again, I mentioned all those movies that came out before, and the proto-slashers that came out before that. And I think they deserve even more credit than Halloween. All those movies combined, I think, deserve more credit than Halloween for being the first slasher movie, or taking the steps for that helped Halloween be the success that it is. Which brings me to an important point that I was eventually going to get to in this video. You've heard me say this on this channel, that Halloween used to be my #1 favorite horror movie of all time. I still love Halloween. It's still in my top 5 favorite horror movies of all time. I absolutely love it. But it has kind of dropped a few spaces for me. And it is a very important horror movie, and I still love Michael Myers. I will say Michael Myers is probably my favorite of the big three, still. But there are a lot of other horror villains that I love more than the big three. But yeah, on my old channel, many times I said that Halloween was my favorite horror movie of all time. And for a while it was, while I was on my old channel. But after a while, it started losing some of its luster. And I even was debating on just flat out saying on my old channel that, yeah, Halloween has kind of lost a little love from me. Not enough for me to hate it, not enough for me to kick it out of my top 5 horror movies, but it has lost some of its luster. But the thing is, this is YouTube. This is the internet, where if you change your opinion, or if you have a different opinion about a movie, it makes you worse than Hitler. And I just didn't want to deal with that aggravation, so I just kept saying that Halloween was my favorite horror movie, eventually trying to think of a way to come clean and say, yeah, it's kind of dropped a little bit for me, without having to get a backlash from man-children. But when I was forced to start this new channel, I viewed it as a clean slate, to finally come clean and say, yes, Halloween was my favorite horror movie of all time. I still love Halloween, but it's dropped a little bit for me in terms of why I love it so much. There were a few reasons for that. One, one reason, which isn't the big reason, but it did play a role in it. I had already started losing some of my love for Halloween before this happened, but Halloween 2018 came out and I absolutely loved it. I loved Halloween 2018. But there were some YouTubers that I have a lot of respect for, whose videos I watched, and I'm not going to say any names here out of respect for them. They did not like Halloween 2018. And they got a lot of shit for it. I mean, like, a lot of unnecessary shit for not liking Halloween 2018. Some of them said that they thought it was okay. And they still got shit for it. And that, I didn't like seeing that. I'm like, really? I mean, yeah, I love Halloween, and I love Halloween 2018, but you're going a little far here. It's okay if someone doesn't like a movie that you like. I mean, someone not liking a movie that you like is literally the least important thing out there. It literally has no effect on your life. Like, let's say, okay, I like the Friday the 13th series. I'm not a huge fan of it. I mean, I do like it, but I'm not as big into it as other people. And if you're a Friday the 13th fan, it's not like I'm coming into your house sitting next to you and saying, hey, this movie sucks. No, I mean, you can still, whether I like the movie or not, you can still watch it and enjoy it. It has no effect on you. And I'm seeing the bullshit that these people had to deal with, and it hurt Halloween 2018 for me. It's like, my God, why is this fan base, why is the fan base that I'm a part of being so ruthless just because people didn't like the movie? You can still watch Halloween 2018 and love it. You can still watch the Halloween series and love it. Yeah, fine, these people don't like it. You can still watch the movie and enjoy it. Why does this have any effect on you? And that really, it tainted Halloween 2018 for me, and that sucked. Because I did love the movie, but seeing how people were treating other people just because they didn't like the movie, it really hurt that movie for me. Admittedly, I was not affected by it at all. I was not negatively affected by Halloween 2018. I admit that full-heartedly. It's seeing how the fan base was treating other people that hit me and made me lose some of my luster for Halloween 2018. But anyway, but the two other main reasons why Halloween started losing its luster for me was getting into movies and getting into exploitation films, and I like researching movies, just in my spare time, because I have a lot of fun doing that. I like film history, and I like that, so I like looking into stuff, and I like going down these little rabbit holes about film, just because I love the genre so much. And, you know, I used to be one of those people that's like, oh yeah, Halloween, the first slasher movie. This is the first slasher movie. It's the biggest one. But then I started going down the rabbit hole, and I came across Black Christmas, which deserves more love, but has finally been getting the respect it deserves in recent years. Not just Black Christmas, but again, Alice Sweet Alice, The Town That Dreaded Sundown, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Madhouse, the Herschel Gordon Lewis movies, the Giallo movies, seeing all these movies that were building blocks to the slasher genre, I was like, okay, yeah, I mean, Halloween owes a lot to all these movies. The slasher genre in general owes a lot to these movies. And yes, I've mentioned it, Black Christmas, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, they owe a lot to movies that came before them as well. It's an ongoing cycle. But, you know, seeing that is like, okay, you know, I mean, Halloween is an important film, but there are all these other great movies that deserve credit too. And that kind of dropped Halloween down a little for me, and then, like I said, the big thing was over-familiarity. I got into horror when I was young, and Halloween, I saw horror movies before Halloween, but Halloween was the movie that made me realize I loved the genre. And I was a little kid when that happened, so I watched Halloween over and over and over again. When you were a kid, you did this too, and if you're a parent with kids, you know this. When a kid finds out they love something, they become obsessed with it. They become obsessed with a movie, they watch it over and over and over and over and over again. Which, okay, parents get frustrated about that. It's like, oh, can't we watch a different movie this time? understand from the kid's perspective. He likes this. He knows he likes this. He doesn't know he likes that other movie. He knows he likes this movie. That's why they become obsessed with it. Nostalgia can be a burden. Yeah, I watched Halloween over and over and over again. I became obsessed with the Halloween franchise. It was my favorite franchise for the longest time. And I'd watch it all the time, not just on Halloween, but I'd watch it whenever I was in the mood to watch Halloween. And every Halloween I had that tradition of watching the Halloween marathon. And, you know, number 3 was my least favorite because it doesn't have Michael Myers. That's changed a lot over the years. It's not my Halloween 3 isn't my favorite in the series, but it is my second favorite after the original. But yeah, I mean, I watched it over and over and over again. And then, after a while, I stopped watching it year-round and saved it for around Halloween. And then I started, putting it in. I was like, okay, it's Halloween, so it's time for my yearly Halloween marathon. And it started getting a little tiresome. And it got to the point where it's like I would put off my Halloween marathon. I would still have it, but I would put it off. Then it got to the point where I'd have my annual Halloween marathon. Here we go. And I'd watch the first one, I'd watch the second one, I'd watch the third one, and I'd say, I want to watch the fourth one tonight. I kind of want to watch something else. And then it got to a point where I'm like, okay, it's the Halloween season. That means it's time for Halloween. And I thought, you know what? I kind of want to put in something else. It was that time when I realized that Halloween wasn't my favorite horror movie anymore. Because I'm like, okay, it's Halloween. Let's not pop in Halloween. A couple of years went by where I did not watch Halloween on Halloween. There were a couple years where I watched Halloween 3 instead of Halloween. And it just was sort of a click with me. It's just like, God, I still love Halloween, but I don't love it as much as I used to. And again, I blame that on over-familiarity. Because I was a kid, I was obsessed with Halloween, so I watched it so much. As I got older, I continued that obsession and watched it all the time, and then just got to the point where it's just like, yeah, I know the beats so much that I just kind of got a little tired of it. And again, that coincides with what I said earlier. As you get older, your taste changes. So, for years, Halloween was my favorite horror movie. For years, Halloween was my favorite slasher movie. So what's my favorite slasher movie now? You can probably guess, but I'm going to keep it a mystery for a little while longer. Alright, you know what? Fine, I'm going to come clean. So if I were to pick my favorite slasher movies now, my top favorite slasher movies, it's a tie right now between Maniac and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. One of the reasons why when I started this new channel, I made my name The Maniac, was sort of a way to come clean and say, yes, Maniac is now my favorite slasher movie, along with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Because these two feel very different from other slasher movies. I mean, I know Texas Chainsaw Massacre started the slasher genre, but there's something about it that makes it feel different from other slasher movies. Black Christmas, I mean, that's a great slasher movie. I will still say that I love Halloween more than Black Christmas, but right after Halloween would be Black Christmas, and Alice, Sweet Alice, I've grown quite fond of that one over the years. That has really grown on me over the years. Like Alone in the Dark, a very unique slasher movie compared to others. But I still love my typical slasher movies, like Madman. I would honestly say out of all the backwoods summer camp slasher movies, this one's my favorite, because it feels like a campfire story more than any other summer camp slasher movie I've seen. And there's some... Once we get to the 2000s, it's kind of hard to find, there aren't as many slasher movies as we used to have. And a lot of the slasher movies that come out nowadays are parodies or homages to past slasher movies. Um, like Hatchet. That's a throwback to '80s slasher movies. It's a good slasher, and I enjoyed it very much. Um, Terrifier. I actually love Terrifier. I know a lot of people don't like Terrifier, and that I get it. It's not everyone's taste. But I was quite fond of Terrifier, and mostly because I love to support no-budget movies or these extremely low-budget movies. Um, I'm a big defender of independent cinema and very low-budget movies, and Terrifier was one of them, so I like to promote that one. But a great post-2000 slasher movie that came out was this one called Creep. Not the found footage one. You know my issues with found footage movies, and I actually really don't like the Creep movies. The found footage Creep movies. I know, grab your torches and pitchforks and come get me, but I'm not too fond of those movies. But there was a Creep that came out in 2007. It's a British movie, and it's about this woman who's trapped in a subway station after closing, and there's this weird, deformed guy coming after her. Very well done slasher movie, kind of reminiscent of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where there was violence, but it happened just out of view, so your mind would fill in the blanks, but it's still really disturbing, and the killer in that one is very unique and one of a very underappreciated slasher villain. And it feels kind of different from other slasher movies. One of the reasons why I love it so much. But, yeah. So, that's my little ramble about slasher movies and how my tastes have changed over the years. I will always love the slasher genre because it was the genre that made me a horror fan. But yeah, I mean, we're always going to have the slasher genre. As much as the genre has dropped a little for me over the years, I will always love Freddy, I will always love Jason, I will always love Michael. Even though I'm not as big of a Friday the 13th fan as other people, I still love the genre. I mean, I still love the series, and I do like to watch it every now and again. Just like with Nightmare on Elm Street and Halloween. Whether you're still a hardcore slasher fan, whether you're like me and love the genre but not as much as you used to, or whether you're someone who has grown out of the genre, I think we still need to respect it, because it is a big part of our genre, and it gave us some of the most memorable villains out there. Freddy, Jason, Michael. We need to remember these characters, but we still need to remember what came before it. Yes, Freddy and Jason would not exist without Michael Myers, but Michael Myers would not exist without Black Christmas. Michael Myers would not exist without Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Michael Myers would not exist without Madhouse. Michael Myers would not exist without the Giallo movies, the Mario Bava movies, the Herschel Gordon Lewis movies, and of course, Hitchcock and Peeping Tom. We should celebrate the slasher genre, but we should also celebrate those movies that came before the slasher genre, that made the slasher genre what it is today. Because all these movies together have given us the horror genre that we know and love. So yeah, that's me getting a little sentimental about the slasher genre, and maybe going into a little too much detail, but, you know, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I like doing this series. I just get to talk straight with you guys and tell my true feelings about everything. I tell my true feelings in my reviews, but this is a little less polished, and I feel like, as honest as I try to be in my reviews, in this series I can be a little more honest with you, and I can be a little more off the cuff. That's why I love doing horror talk so much. Well, anyway, on that note, leave a comment down below. Let me know your thoughts on the slasher genre. Let me know if you are still a hardcore slasher fan. Let me know if you grew out of the genre a little bit. Nothing wrong with either answer, it's all a part of growing up. And let me know what other horror talks you'd like me to talk about. I've gotten a few requests to talk about the history of the rating system. I don't know how many people would be interested in that, though, but if you would be interested about it, leave in the comments down below, because I wouldn't mind talking about that sometime, the history of the rating system. Thank you all so much for watching, as always. I always appreciate the support. I continue to get comments saying that people like my videos, and I've gotten comments saying that my videos have cheered people up after a bad day, and that does mean a lot to me. I'm glad I can bring a little happiness into your life while talking about some sleazy, dirty, violent movies. But on that note, I hope you're all having a good day. Please take care of each other, and this is the Maniac, here to remind you that the Grindhouse will never die.